When it comes to rock stars, the first thing that comes to mind is his name. A person who appeared on the stage back in the mid-60s but stubbornly does not intend to leave it, despite age and a terrible illness. He's one of the founders of the cult band Black Sabbath, which is not without reason considering the father of heavy metal. A man with dyslexia who wrote scary and touching songs at the same time. Half of the Colombian economy passed through his nose. His liver could withstand hundreds of tons of alcohol, but he still kept his sanity. Well, more or less. Why did he throw rotten meat at the fans? Why did he bite off the bat's head? What was he in prison for? And how did he create one of the most famous rock bands in history? You are on the Inco Stories channel, and today we have a full story of the life and work of the great Ozzy Osbourne. So without further ado, grab something tasty and let's get started. John Michael Osbourne was born on December 3, 1948 in the Aston area of Birmingham, Great Britain. This place did not promise special prospects unless, of course, your calling was to stand at the conveyor for 12 hours. All the working class lived in small houses with toilets outside, and all around were the ruins left by the war. During the Second World War, the city was constantly bombarded by Germans, as tanks, trucks, and planes gathered in the city. When I was a kid, there were houses around every corner that the Germans had razed to the ground in the hope of bombing Spitfire production. Then I naively assumed that this is what children's playgrounds are called and that they were the target of bombings. His father, John Thomas, was a locksmith and worked the night shift at the General Electric plant. Father often talked about the war. Almost every night, German planes dropped explosives and mines on parachutes, so there was such a glow over the city that you could read a newspaper even at night. When the father returned from work, Ozzy's mother, whose name was Lillian, went to the factory for her shift. She was Catholic, but not fanatical. The Osbourne family didn't go to church, but Ozzy somehow signed up for a Sunday school because there was free tea and cookies. Ozzy was the fourth child and the first boy in the Osbourne family. The older sisters were named Jean, Iris, and Jillian. Soon after his birth, Ozzy had two younger brothers, Paul and Tony. As a child, Ozzy was a very nervous child. He constantly thought that he was going to get into trouble. For example, when he was walking home, he tried not to step on the cracks between the slabs. And when his father came home from the night shift and was asleep on the couch, Ozzy thought he was dead and kept trying to wake him up. It's hard to imagine how the father felt, but he never once raised a hand against the child. According to Ozzy's memories, his father was a simple and old-fashioned man. He liked to pass a few glasses of beer, but he never got drunk. This, Ozzy recalled, was the one thing he wanted to inherit, but he couldn't. From time to time, my dad would take me to a bar with him. For a long time, I puzzled over what beer tasted like, and when I finally tried it, I thought I had never tasted anything worse in my life. But also, then I realized that a person feels somewhat different after beer. At the age of 18, I drank a glass in 5 seconds. After the bar, father liked to sing at home. Ozzy's sisters and mother were not far behind him either. Sister Jean would bring him home Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley records, teach everyone the lyrics, and have family concerts on Saturday nights. At one of these family performances, Ozzy gave his first solo concert and sang the hit Living Doll by Cliff Richard, which he heard on the radio. At that time, thoughts about a career as a singer did not even come to his mind. Ozzy knew that he had only two options: to go to the factory or to rob a bank. A penchant for delinquency was discovered at an early age when Ozzy made friends with a boy named Patrick Murphy. They lived on the same street. Their families were friends, and very soon the boys began to seek adventures together. It all started with stealing apples, but ended with a hospital. Ozzy and Patrick climbed over high fences, stuffed their pockets with apples, and made successful escapes again and again, until one day the dogs were set upon them. Ozzy was in such a hurry to escape that he jumped over the fence and landed head first on the asphalt. A few stitches and a concussion could not stop his thirst for hooliganism. After that, the boys began to shake the parking machines to get some coins from them. Then they started stealing from stores. My ancestors had 6 children, and we didn't get fat. Man does the most disgusting things to fill his stomach. Personally, this is not at all a reason for pride for me. I'm not the type of person who says, "Now I'm great, I've got money. Why bother with the past?" The boys also earned good money during games held at the Aston Villa Stadium. In those days, cars were not locked with a key, so some people paid the boys half a shilling to guard the cars. Once they decided to do a good deed for free and clean someone's car with an iron brush. After that, it was dangerous to appear near the stadium. Ozzy hated school, and the only thing he liked about it were breaks between classes. It was difficult for him to study. Sometimes when the boy opened the textbook, it seemed to him that everything was written in Chinese. It wasn't until many years later that Ozzy learned that he had dyslexia, a disorder that made it difficult to read and write. Ozzy would even write his autobiography in co-authorship with a writer named Chris Ayers. The only good thing about having dyslexia is that dyslexics are usually very creative people, or so I've been told. We think in unusual ways, but it's a very bad stigma to have, not being able to read like normal people can. They started calling him Ozzy in junior high school. It was a shortening of his last name. Soon the boy got so used to it that he even stopped responding to his real name. He was called John only at home. After finishing junior school, Ozzy attended Birchfield Road High School in Perry Barr. They wore uniforms, kids wore ties and jackets, but Ozzy always showed up in torn jeans and dirty sweaters. This is a case of teenage rebellion combined with poverty. In this school, he liked classes on the history of England. Their teacher did not just retell the textbook, but took the children on excursions to the places where fierce battles were fought just a few years ago. In almost all other subjects, Ozzy got the lowest grades. Only metalworking classes were easy for him. Once, he even won in a competition for the manufacture of a shoelace. There was also school bullying. When Ozzy was 10 to 11 years old, older boys constantly bullied him. As far as he remembers, nothing terrible was done to him, but he was constantly waiting after school to be spanked, and Ozzy was terrified all the time. He did not tell any of the adults about the bullying because they had enough of their own problems. Finally, there was a way to end this persecution. I noticed the biggest guy on the playground and grimaced until he laughed. That's how he became my friend. At the school was a guy named Tony Lummy, who, although he was a high school student, never got attached to Ozzy. Tony was tall, handsome, adored by the girls, and feared by the boys because he was a good fighter but never got in first. Ozzy admired him. One day when the children were allowed to bring their Christmas presents to school, Tony brought a brand new bright red electric guitar. Ozzy was jealous because he would have liked to have one too, but at that time his parents would not have had the money, and he would not have had the patience to learn to play. Tony was talented, could master any musical instrument, and even from those days, Ozzy wondered how Lummy's fate would turn out. After a few years, their paths will cross for many decades. The fact that the Osbournes could not afford to buy their son a guitar is only a small episode of the family's financial crisis. Even in junior high school, Ozzy began to understand that his parents were much poorer than others. They had old newspapers instead of toilet paper, rubber boots instead of shoes, and Ozzy had no underwear at all. In addition, the parents were constantly visited by creditors who came to their homes and demanded interest. One day, Mum gave Ozzy 10 shillings for his birthday to buy himself a flashlight. He lost the rest on the way home, and it was one of the saddest days of his childhood. There were also some sad episodes related to girls. As Ozzy recalls, he was not popular among girls at school. Most of them considered him a fool, but there were other opinions. His first girlfriend's name was Jane. Before each date with her, he rubbed soap into his hair, trying to make it lie flat. Once he went on a date in the rain, and when he arrived, his head was covered in foam. That was the end of the relationship. Once he tried to impress the girl with how much he smokes. After the 5th cigarette, the date ended because Ozzy got stuck on the movie theater toilet and nearly puked his lungs out. He started smoking in junior high school and spent more time in the school toilet with a cigarette than in his classroom studying. Actually, this is confirmed by his unsatisfactory school certificate. Ozzy finished school at the age of 15 and was faced with a difficult but inevitable choice: physical labor or hard physical labor. Immediately after school, Osbourne got a job as a plumber. It was in the fall when there was a lot of work because pipes were bursting all over the city. He stayed there for less than a week, and then they kicked him out because he stole apples during lunch breaks. The next job was less promising and more difficult. Beneath the Aston was an auto parts factory, and Ozzy was supposed to maintain a facility that cleaned and degreased these parts. Parts were washed not with water, but with poisonous chemicals, so it was forbidden to work without a mask. Somehow, Ozzy decided to try what would happen if he inhaled these fumes for a while. It hit me like I smelled glue, only 100 times stronger. Since then, I regularly inhaled the fumes in the morning. It was much cheaper than going to a beer hall. I started with twice a day, then sniffed every 5 minutes. After each session, my face was covered with a layer of black fat from the fumes. The shopmates quickly found out what was the matter. A week later, he inhaled too much and started running around the shop like a maniac. He sang songs, danced, and then passed out. He woke up in the emergency room and learned that he had been poisoned by fumes after all, and that he had been fired. His parents didn't like it because he continued to live with them and had to pay for food and bills. This angered his mother so much that she spoke to her superiors and got her son's job at the Lucas car factory. The new job did not promise great prospects either, as he had to fix car horns. Immediately after that, Ozzy began to think about how to escape from Aston. He tried to get on a ship going to Australia, but there was not enough money for that. He was also not accepted as a volunteer in the army, so he had to fix horns. The work was monotonous. Every day it was necessary to adjust the horn with a screwdriver and check whether it made a sound. And the sound he made was loud and disgusting. 900 pieces each day, and 5 of them worked in the room. In the evening, the hum in his head was so loud that Ozzy could not hear his own thoughts. Once he decided to talk to one of his colleagues and found out that he had worked in the workshop for 29 years and was very proud that his anniversary was coming up. This affected Ozzy so much that he went to the bar before the day was over. He was done with the horns. This work, Ozzy ironically called the first step in the music business, because there he also worked on sound. He didn't even dream of really getting into music. Nevertheless, from the very time when Ozzy first sang at a family party, he dreamed of his own band, and his thoughts were almost material. He lied quite often to people he knew that he already had a Black Panthers band, but all he had was an empty guitar case he found in a dumpster. Everything changed when the Beatles hit the airwaves, and I bought their record with the Beatles with my last paycheck. When I got home, everything changed, like a light went on in my head, and I endlessly listened to it. Osbourne was so impressed that he began to collect everything related to the Beatles. Posters, photos, postcards. Sometimes he even walked around the city with a record in his hands because he could not part with it. Acquaintance with the Liverpool foursome and the general Beatlemania inspired Ozzy to make drastic changes. First, he didn't want to work in a factory because his idols didn't either. Moreover, he was somewhat younger than them, so he had a lot of time left to become famous. But how to do it? Ozzy started with his looks, growing his hair long and getting some tattoos. His first one was the dagger on the hand, which Ozzy had filled with his own hand with an ink needle. Then there was the inscription Ozzy on the fingers, and it is safe to say that it was at this moment that Ozzy Osbourne was born. In 1964, Ozzy got his dream job at a cattle slaughterhouse. At first, his duties included cleaning out the stomachs of animals, but then Ozzy climbed the career ladder and began slaughtering cows himself. Damn, what a job that was, I'll tell you. Whoever gets a hoof in the groin will immediately understand everything about life. Usually after Ozzy's work at the company, a colleague went to a bar where they got drunk and threw cow's eyes into people's cocktails. Ozzy also liked this job because the nightclub Midnight City was located nearby. Sometimes after his shift, he would dance and drink there until morning and then go to work again. Ozzy lasted more than a year and a half, and then he was kicked out for fighting. One of the colleagues made an inappropriate joke and got smashed by a board on the head for it. Ozzy was released and soon spent 3 months in prison. As Osbourne recalls, he just wanted to impress his peers, not become a gangster. In a word, after the cattle slaughter, Ozzy became a houseboy and robbed several houses. In one house, he stole 25 pounds. In another, several hangers and shirts. Once, he even carried the TV out, but it was so heavy that it fell on his chest and Ozzy lay in the ditch for an hour trying to get up and run away. There was no professional thief from Osbourne. A few days after the last case, the police came to the house. The court fined 18-year-old Osbourne 40 pounds. He did not have such money, and his father refused to lend him it. As a result, Ozzy was sent to the old Winson Green prison for 3 months. This place gave Ozzy real horror and forever discouraged his desire to engage in crime. The guards were strict and the prisoners weren't known for their kindness. He didn't know how to fight, so like at school, he noticed a few big boys and fooled around until they laughed. Ozzy got many of his new tattoos here. One of the cellmates showed that neither a needle nor ink is needed for this. All you need is a ballpoint pen, a pen, and dishwashing liquid. The first thing he stuffed were smiles on his knees to make sitting on the toilet more fun. In prison, Ozzy also met Tommy Iommi, whom he hadn't seen since school. The day before, he robbed several coffee shops and got his 4-month sentence. Osbourne was released in the winter of 1969. He had a wallet, a few cigarettes, house keys, and a clear understanding that something needed to change. After his release, Ozzy placed an advertisement in the window of the Ringway music store where he wrote in large letters, "Ozzy is looking for a band." It was added below that he's an experienced frontman with his own equipment. Of course, it was all lies. While in prison, he often imagined how he would get a band together. They would become famous, and then Ozzy would tell how that very announcement gave birth to new celebrities. Actually, that's what happened. Maybe Ozzy's father felt guilty for letting his son get behind bars. Maybe he was influenced by his respect for music. But when he heard that his son was going to perform, he promised to buy him equipment. The money in the family was barely enough to pay the bills, but the father found £250 somewhere to buy an amplifier and 2 speakers. When Ozzy got the equipment, he immediately got acquainted with local rockers. There was a band called The Approach, and Ozzy rehearsed with them and got drunk. Enthusiasm was present only in Ozzy. Everyone else could barely attend even rehearsals, let alone concerts. But Ozzy had a specific goal and was going for it. Between us, I could already intonate properly, but when I went to high notes, the windows didn't crack and the local cats didn't want to mate with me. And that was already something. Osbourne never appeared on stage with them, but luckily Michael Butler, or Geezer, appeared on his doorstep. He came to Osbourne's house and told him that his band, Rare Breed, needed a vocalist and an amplifier. He chose not to talk about the fact that Ozzy had never sung on stage, so he was accepted into the first band. Geezer, or Michael Butler, was different. He did not curse, did not eat meat, read ancient Greek books and Chinese poetry, played the guitar perfectly, and wrote good lyrics. It seemed to Ozzy that he was not just from another city, he was from another planet. Despite the fact that Ozzy had a first partner and solid equipment, dreams of a career as a musician were shattered by everyday life. They performed infrequently. The biggest fee was a few cans of beer, and Ozzy also developed quite a stage fright. But one day, just as Geezer visited Ozzy once, 2 more came to the Osbourne house. One of them was called Bill Ward. He was a drummer, and he saw an ad that Ozzy was looking for a band. He grabbed his buddy and led him to the Osbourne house to see who this Ozzy was. As soon as the door opened, the other guy was surprised and said something like, quote, "I know this jerk. He's not a front man, and I will not play with him." The second guy, standing on the doorstep of the Osbourne's house, was Tony Iommi. That could have been the end of it, but Ozzy saw that Tony's arm was wrapped in bandages and asked what the matter was. While Ozzy was working at the chemical plant, Tony was a metal worker and a locksmith assistant. During the day, he cut metal, and in the evening, he went to clubs and played the guitar. He was even offered a big solo performance in Germany, but an accident prevented him. Just a few days before the trip, Tony cut sheets of metal and accidentally cut off the phalanges of 2 fingers on his right hand, middle and ring. Tony was a lefty and played chords with those fingers. Imagine being told in the hospital that he, one of the best guitarists of the 20th century, would never be able to play. After what happened, Tony plunged into a terrible depression for a long time and could hardly get out of bed. But one day, his old mentor from the factory brought a record of the Belgian musician Django Reinhardt, a jazz guitarist who played amazing solos, although he could only pick chords with 2 fingers. The rest were burned. At first, Tony tried to play with his right hand, but nothing worked. Then he turned to the left and began to play the chords with 2 fingers, but that did not suit him either. Finally, he figured out what to do. Tony melted down a plastic bottle from under the ferry and made 2 thimbles for the damaged fingers. After that, he sanded them down until they were the shape and size of fingertips. Next, he glued small leather covers on top so that it would be convenient to press the strings. Since then, Tony began to learn to play from scratch, although he had no feeling in his fingers. After that, they talked all night, decided to call Geezer over, and also agreed to come up with a name for their new band. The first option was the name Polka Tulk Blues Band, which Ozzy inspired by a can of polka dots. Also, at first, the young people were going to play dirty blues with the maximum number of instruments, so they wanted to find a saxophonist and a slide guitarist. In the end, they were found, but they were kicked out of the band after the first concerts, and the guys decided to perform as a quartet. They simply had nothing to pay. Officially, there was no leader in the band, but everyone understood that it was Tony. He was the oldest, had experience, and most importantly, a great talent. Not everyone had a lot of money. It got to the point that they had to steal vegetables from other people's gardens in order to have something to eat. Tony's parents often helped out. They were not rich, but they kept a small shop and often gave the musicians sandwiches, canned goods, and only sometimes money. After the first concerts, where they were not even paid, they changed the name to Earth because it sounded more solid than Polka Tulk. Success seemed illusory, but they stubbornly continued. Then their music sounded like this. Not Black Sabbath yet, but not Polka Tulk either. When a famous band came to town, they would load their equipment into a van and look for a place where the stars stayed. Somehow, they were lucky when the then famous band Jethro Tull was scheduled to perform in the city. They were also lucky that the band eventually never came, and Tony went to negotiate with the club's management to offer a replacement for Jethro Tull. Imagine the situation: 1,000 angry fans waiting for the performance of their favorite band, and instead of them, No Names enter the stage and start playing their strange music. I remember this unreal adrenaline rush. Emotions overwhelmed me. I forgot about fear, and the concert itself created a sensation. At first, the people grumbled and I had to dodge the flying shells, but in the end, we had such a good time that we were remembered for a long time. After such a successful performance, the concerts instantly increased and managers began to circle around them. And just as the first possible contract loomed on the horizon, Tony Iommi left the band. He was invited to the place of guitarist in the same band Jethro Tull, which was soon to perform on the stage with the Rolling Stones. Obviously, Tony couldn't refuse. And it was terrible news for everyone. Without Tony, they were nothing. And this is not an exaggeration, but an almost direct quote. Tony was the leader, and he didn't even want to look for a new one. That's how much anyone was inferior to him in skill. But Tony Iommi wasn't going to leave forever. He played a few big shows with real stars and then took off and went back to guys who weren't even getting paid to perform yet.
Tony, Black Sabbath has been together for 17 years. How can any band stay together for 17 years? What makes it work that well?
Glue. Just a blend of people, really. It's like a brotherhood.
Did you ever think 17 years ago that the band would still be together?
No, not really. You don't really think as far as how many years they're going to be together. It's just enjoying it and doing it.
Their first manager was a man named Jim Simpson. He saw the band at one early show and must have sensed something. The first thing he did during his tenure was to send the musicians on a European tour. It sounds massive, but in reality it looked like this. They loaded all the equipment and instruments into a van and drove towards Copenhagen, where the first concert was to be held. Around this time, the concept that would later give the band its last and final name was born. Near the cultural center where the band's rehearsals took place, there was a cinema where only horror films were shown. Tony Iommi once asked, quote, "Doesn't it surprise you that people pay money to be scared? Maybe we'll start writing scary music." Ozzy liked the idea, and soon there were some lyrics that became the basis of the song Black Sabbath. In short, this is the story of a boy who sees a dark entity approaching him to drag him into a lake of fire. Tony came up with a creepy riff, and Ozzy threw in a melody. They later learned that Tony's riff was built on the so-called Devil's Interval, or Triton. They say that in the Middle Ages, the church forbade its use in religious songs. The organist started playing, and the parishioners thought that the devil was about to jump out from behind the altar. There's definitely something like that in this song. The reaction to the first performance was more than favorable. Young women ran out of the hall screaming, and men almost killed each other in a slam. At that time, the band was still called Earth, but it had to be changed because there was often confusion and there was a person in the hall who came to another band. When the band left for Germany, Ozzy wrote a letter to his parents telling them that they would soon return to England and that they were now called Black Sabbath. So, August 9th, 1969 can be considered the date of the band's birth. This date mystically coincides with the tragedy in Los Angeles when the psychopath Charles Manson shot people, but the band did not know about it because they were on tour. Many of Black Sabbath's concerts were played at the famous Star Club, which was frequented even by the Beatles themselves. Often they played there as permanent artists and could perform for 7 hours in a row until late at night, or even into the morning. In order to remain active, they used everything prohibited by law. Ozzy quickly got used to the stage and began to create real hell to entertain the audience. As soon as someone noticed that the people in the hall were sad, Ozzy began to riot. He poured paint on his head, shouted obscenities into the microphone, or simply undressed. In the European tour, such songs as The Wizard, N.I.B., War Pigs appeared, so they already had something to perform and the album gradually began to come together. Jim Simpson agreed with music producer Tony Hall, who promised to release the first Black Sabbath record at his own expense. They signed the contract in January 1970, but there was one problem. Despite the huge number of performances, the guys did not understand how to behave in the studio and did everything like at concerts. Each of the quartet received £105 in advance, an incredible amount of money for people who had been out of work for several years, robbing drunken fans and subsisting on stolen vegetables. The first thing I bought was aftershave to smell better. Then I bought myself new shoes because the old ones fell apart in Denmark. I gave the rest to my mother to pay the bills, and then I asked her for money to drink for my success. The recording went something like this. In the morning, they went into the studio, Regent Sound in Soho, set up the equipment, and played all the available songs as they played in concerts. After that, in a few hours, they polished the guitars and vocals, and all this took no more than 12 hours. A few weeks later, Jim Simpson assembled the band at his home, brought a briefcase, and took out a fresh Black Sabbath record. The artist who designed the cover did not ask the opinion of the musicians, but everyone was delighted. In addition to the record itself, there was also an envelope inside with an old poem written on it, as well as an upside-down cross drawn on it. As Ozzy recalls, they didn't know it was a Satanist symbol, but when they found out, they weren't too worried. It looked cool and sounded even better. Despite the fact that Ozzy was brought to tears when he listened to the record for the first time, the critics crushed it. The album went on sale in February 1970 and received reviews that mostly repeated words such as crude, secondary, similar to the band Cream. The latter particularly impressed Ozzy because he considered Cream to be almost the best in the world. Since then, he does not read reviews of his albums. And if you could ignore the journalists, then the father's indifference to his son's work really affected Ozzy. When the record came out, he brought it to his father and let him listen to the lead track. The father was silent for almost 8 minutes while the song was playing, and at the end he asked, quote, "Son, do you really drink nothing but beer?" Due to the occult design of the album, inverted crosses, and lyrics about spirits, a certain image was fixed for the band. They were considered Satanists, although Ozzy replied that the only thing he worshipped was gin and whiskey. Satanists offered to perform for them near Stonehenge. Concerts were constantly attended by strange dudes in black clothes, and this served as the best advertisement. The album, the first circulation of which was only 5,000 copies, sold 1 million copies by the end of the year. Everyone was shocked, especially their producer, Jim Simpson. By placing a bet at random, he won the jackpot. The album cost about £500 to record, so the profit was astronomical. Simpson could not cope with the work and did not want to hire assistants, and other producers who sensed money were already circling around the band. In the end, the band outgrew Simpson's capabilities and were lured to him by Patrick Meehan and his label, Worldwide Artists. Imagine 3 years earlier, Ozzy Osbourne was cleaning the stomachs of animals in a slaughterhouse, sitting in prison, and now he could call the manager and ask to be picked up from a 5-star hotel in a a green convertible. The album's sales only increased, and although Patrick took the large share of all income, no one complained. The revenue was shared equally because the songs were also written together. Tony wrote the chords, Geezer wrote the lyrics, Ozzy picked the melody and sang, and Bill played the drums. And if everything was fine with the band, the atmosphere in the parents' house was tense. Looking back on those days, Ozzy says it was all about the money. Mom didn't say anything directly, but the question hung in the air. Anyway, money, money, and money again. Nothing but money. Nothing like, "I'm proud of you, son. Well done, you finally got lucky, you worked hard, I love you." Only money. This, in the end, turned me away from home. In the end, in order not to destroy the relationship with his parents forever, Ozzy left his native home. At the same time, he began his first serious relationship with a woman. Ozzy was never a heartthrob, and most of his relationships began under the influence of alcohol. After the concerts, so-called groupies were constantly found in their dressing room with whom they continued to have fun already in the apartments. Once in the club, Ozzy saw a beautiful woman, got drunk, and only then dared to dance with her. Her name was Thelma Riley, and their relationship didn't end after one night. They continued to communicate, then rented a room in a good area of Birmingham and began to live together. The couple got married in 1971. It seemed to Ozzy that it would help him to become domesticated, to get on the right path, but the story of the crazy Ozzy Osbourne was just beginning. The band was supposed to go on a big tour of America, but before that they recorded their second record, just 5 months after the first one. They recorded it in the same studio with the same method because it worked. Originally, the album was to be called War Piggers, but then the name was changed to simply War Pigs. Geezer wrote strong lyrics about death and destruction and could not stand boring love stories. Even when he wrote such texts, they always had an unexpected twist, like for example in the song N.I.B., where the boys turned out to be the devil. It's interesting that one of the most famous songs, Paranoid, appeared only because the second album had to be made a few minutes longer. They were about to leave the studio, but Tony started improvising, and 20 minutes later, this song appeared. That's how the best songs always are. They come out of nowhere and when nobody's trying too hard. When the label bosses heard the song, within 2 seconds they named the entire album Paranoid. The bosses were not mistaken. The single took 4th place among the British singles, which allowed Black Sabbath to perform on the legendary show Top of the Pops. The value of this performance for Ozzy was the highest. Even as children, the Osbourne family sat down in front of the TV every Sunday to watch this program together. The greatest musicians of the era had performed there, and now Ozzy was to appear there. This performance and this song, recorded in 20 minutes, changed their lives forever. For 2 months, Black Sabbath toured America, enjoying the fame, but in the States, Osbourne was mostly impressed by ordinary pizza. In England, it was not prepared, but in America, he discovered this divine dish and ate several pizzas a day. In those days, a trip to America was a dream beyond the reach of ordinary people, and they spent 2 months there. Despite this, everyone missed England and couldn't wait to get home. Whenever they performed, the halls were full. The album sold even better in America than in England. The unprecedented success of the first album and the 2-month tour blew the heads of everyone in Black Sabbath, especially Ozzy Osbourne. They used all the substances, which not only allowed them to relax, but also kept them active so that they would not fall asleep during the performance. Ozzy was immersed in a thick hallucinogenic fog and was unable to remember half of what happened to him during those times. Sometimes he came out of this fog and found out that now he and the band are in the studio and writing the 3rd album, called Master of Reality. Of course, one cannot be an exemplary family man in such a state. The situation was complicated by the fact that her 5-year-old son from a previous marriage lived with Ozzy and Thelma. Ozzy adopted him, but their relationship did not stick. He also did not behave well with his wife. He cheated on tour with everyone he met. He was sober at home, only in his dreams, and 9 months after the wedding, Thelma got pregnant. The birth of Ozzy Osbourne's child could not be ordinary either. When his wife was in her last month of pregnancy, they were sitting in a restaurant when she discovered that her water broke. Ozzy was so scared that he started looking for a doctor, but his wife said she needed a hospital, not a doctor. Ozzy was in a panic, not knowing what to do, but Thelma kept calm and explained that she needed to be taken outside, then put in a car, and taken to the hospital. Ozzy began to panic even more because he couldn't drive and was still drunk. If he was drunk for several years and it was not a problem, the major problem he had with the car. In the end, he put his wife in the passenger seat and he sat behind the wheel and tried to move for 20 minutes. The car rattled, shook, but then gave way, and Ozzy was still able to take his wife to the hospital. A girl named Jessica Starshine was born there on January 20th, 1972. If getting married didn't help Ozzy become an exemplary family man, maybe having a daughter helped. Not at all. A month later, Black Sabbath were again in the States where they recorded a new album which was to be called Snowblind. Its name was a direct reference to the white powder that accompanied the band and Ozzy himself for the past few years.
I did for a while, and in the end, disaster happens. It's inevitable to happen, disaster, because it's like drugs. They were okay at the time, but we outgrew them, you know. We just, you know, we took LSD, we took cocaine, we took vast amounts of marijuana. It was fun at the time, but then we all just sort of this ain't a very good idea anymore.
So you have a more stable life now?
No.
In the USA, the band lived in a large residence of the 30s, which served as their home and base. They had gardeners, cleaners, and chefs work there. In almost every room, there was a plate with, you know what kind of powder, and it was used in such quantities that it was delivered several times a day. Also in the house were huge barrels of beer and wine, bars full of alcohol which also ran out in a matter of days. When Ozzy was high, he liked to lie in front of the TV and watch American shows, so it's a real miracle that they also managed to write new music. Despite the constant delirium, these few weeks gave a powerful boost to Black Sabbath's career. Snowblind is, in my opinion, one of the best Black Sabbath albums ever, even though the record company wouldn't let us keep the name. And this is not surprising, because at that time the white powder did not disappear from the news headlines. No one wanted the record to serve as an unnecessary advertisement for these dangerous substances. The title of the album was changed to simply Volume 4, but attentive listeners already saw the endless references to you-know-what. Even the acknowledgments written on the cover include Osbourne's words thanking a company called Coke for the inspiration. The impact of this substance on the band is difficult to overestimate, of course. It was mostly negative, and the first serious health problems quickly began. During the recording of the song Under the Sun, Bill Ward was so stoned by the constant use that he could not even play his part. The song was rewritten again, and by the end it was already called Under the Fucking Sun. In addition, Bill got hepatitis and almost died from liver problems. Geezer was also in the hospital with kidney disease, and Tony was not far behind with his diseases. As for Ozzy, the powder nearly destroyed his voice. Ozzy was so scared that he immediately ran to the hospital, and it turned out that everything could be fixed. The last place before returning to England was the venereologist's office, where each participant received an injection so as not to bring anything extra home. In England, his wife and daughter were waiting for Ozzy. He bought them a house outside the city, and he did the same for his parents. Osbourne liked country life and had fun to the fullest. The whole shed was lined with jukeboxes. He got a pool table, a football table, and all the things he didn't have as a child. The habit picked up in America has not gone anywhere. Ozzy set up a home delivery of substances and turned into the country's Pablo Escobar. Every night he got so drunk that he couldn't even climb to the second floor to sleep in bed. He lay in the grass, on the stairs, and just on the floor. Among his neighbors was, for example, Robert Plant from the band Led Zeppelin, and in his house there was no less hell than in Ozzy's. If Ozzy wasn't drinking at home, he was drinking at Robert Plant's or at a bar. Ozzy looked something like this in those days.
Starting tomorrow. Is it always like this, or is this an exception?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, Come on!
Yeah. No. It's like we did. 16 days ago we got over from Japan.
Throughout the 70s, Ozzy Osbourne was always under something, but the paradox is that they continued to write music and it turned out no worse than sober. The next album was recorded in a haunted castle on the border with Wales. Someone thought it would be cool for a band with such a mystical aura to record an album in such a strange place. In fact, they wanted to record the album in the usual studio, but at that moment, it was occupied by Stevie Wonder. Since the previous album, Volume 4, had already managed to become a classic, Black Sabbath planned to repeat its success. They really didn't want to be another band that wrote 3 cool albums and started releasing crap. This happened all the time, and many bands simply disappeared from the horizon. The work was slow. Tony couldn't come up with new riffs, and without them there were no new songs. In the end, the mystical atmosphere of the castle and the recently heard album Golden Earring inspired Tony to experiment, and the work began. Most of the time, all 4 of them were doing silly things. Scaring each other with terrible screams that bounced off the fireplace walls, communicated with spirits through the Ouija board, set fire to carpets which almost burned down the castle. But they also wrote music. Towards the end of their stay at the haunted castle, they accumulated a lot of material for the next record, and the band moved into a studio in North London. The new album was called Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and the title song became the next big hit. The design of the cover was also not far behind and looked in their style. A man lies in bed and is attacked by demons from all sides. There is a belief among old musicians that if everyone who made it liked the record and everyone at the record company liked it, then things were going to go badly. By his own admission, Ozzy considers this album to be their last major record. They managed to combine the old heavy sound with something new and experimental. We were all pleased with how Sabbath Bloody Sabbath turned out. Even Patrick Meehan and the record company, which really only meant one thing. From then on, we were only going downhill. Ozzy believes that this could have been predicted because life had given him signs the day before. For example, when they were flying to America, his neighbor on the plane died over the Atlantic. At first, he thought that the neighbor had simply fallen asleep, but when even the flight attendant could not wake him up, it became clear that the man was not breathing. Another harbinger of the end was that Sabbath Bloody Sabbath became the first record to receive critical acclaim. During the tour in support of this album, all the members of the band realized how much they annoy each other. Everyone was nervous, and banned substances played a significant role in this. Tony Iommi hated that he stayed in the studio at night because he was producing. He did not have time for his personal life because he constantly wanted to add something else to the song, then something else, and so on and so forth. Ozzy would finish his part and leave the studio, and Tony would stay until the perfect result. They were suffering from some star sickness too, as everyone fancied themselves a big rock star. In the mid-70s, everything changed. If earlier the band stayed together, rested together, and indulged in madness, now everyone was on his own. After the tour, it became clear that everything was starting to fall apart. The issue of finances was also acute. Everyone understood that the manager was not giving them half of what they were making, so he was fired. But he turned out to be legally savvy, and he was not going to let the band go just like that. Long court cases began. One process was replaced by another, and there was no end in sight. In this atmosphere, they wrote the next album, which was called Sabotage. According to Osbourne himself, this record cannot boast of anything in particular. The only thing he was proud of was the song The Writ, almost entirely written by him. The album Sabotage was released in July 1975 and was again highly praised by critics. Rolling Stone magazine, in particular, called it the best of the band's career, but sales continued to fall. Misunderstandings between band members, lawsuits, and alcohol worsened the atmosphere in Ozzy's family. He first hit his wife, who had recently given birth to a son named Louis. Thelma put up with me, and I'm very sorry for that. What I would like more than anything in the world is to take it back, but of course, it is impossible to avoid cruelty, no matter what, and I will carry this cross until the end of my days. The band could not come to terms with the fact that sales declined and decided to immediately record another album. It was called Technical Ecstasy. To distract themselves and change the environment, they decided to record in Miami, where they rented a studio. Since the court proceedings dragged on too slowly, there were almost no payments for previous releases. They had to save money and write quickly. Musically, the record represents the further development of the musical ideas of the band's guitarist and main composer, Tony Iommi. As with the previous two albums on Technical Ecstasy, simple and short songs like Rock and Roll Doctor contrast with longer and more complex songs like You Won't Change Me and Dirty Women. Towards the end of the recording, Ozzy ended up in a psychiatric clinic. The stress caused by grueling recording and fueled by alcohol was in full force. He stayed there for a short time, but this eloquently complements Osbourne's biography. Even greater trials awaited him ahead. Relations with the band members continued to deteriorate, and lawsuits ate up almost all profits, and even the upcoming tour did not promise much income. One day during rehearsal, Ozzy went outside and never came back. Besides problems with his wife, the band, and his psyche, he had a family tragedy. His father was diagnosed with cancer, and treatment would no longer help. Ozzy saw his father on the day of the operation. He looked good. He was even walking on his own. Ozzy revealed that he had quit Black Sabbath, and his father replied that without Ozzy, they would be done. The next day, Jack Osbourne, Ozzy's father, died. The singer coped with his death hard. In his memory, Ozzy wrote the song Junior's Eyes. Black Sabbath wasn't going to stop without Ozzy. While he was dealing with his tragedy and drowning in even more alcohol, Dave Walker, who used to sing in the band Fleetwood Mac, was taken in his place. But the new vocalist did not manage to settle in, so after a few weeks, Ozzy returned to record a new album. At first glance, it seemed that everything was normal and that everything was going as before, but very soon the old problems began to surface. Their new manager, named Colin Newman, recommended that they record the album in Canada. This would make the band musical immigrants. That is, there was no need to give 80% of the profits to the old label. Once in Toronto, Black Sabbath began to record the album Never Say Die, but the old problems did not disappear anywhere. Ozzy drank heavily and once almost died after falling asleep with a cigarette. The atmosphere in the studio was uneasy, especially after Ozzy said he wanted to do his own music project. It felt like things weren't the same, especially in the relationship between me and Tony. It seems that we no longer put our hearts into what we were doing. The album Never Say Die failed miserably in America, but held up well in Britain and climbed to the 12th place in the album charts. This allowed them to appear on Top of the Pops with Bob Marley. Around this time, Ozzy met a woman named Sharon Arden. She was the daughter of Don Arden, who became their new manager and ran their affairs. Maybe Ozzy chose Don just to see his daughter more often. Given that Sharon was soon to be his wife, this might be true. But it wasn't love at first sight, at least not for Sharon.
No, not at all. I was like, oh Lord, look at them. And they were all odd and hairy, and because I'd been used to dealing with artists that were American, and they were slick and they were really put together, and they smelled nice, and you know, suddenly these guys come in and they're hairy and they're very, you know, from the north of England, and they don't look or dress like anything I've ever seen. And so I was very nervous of them.
As for the band, it was obvious to Ozzy that the Black Sabbath story was coming to an end, but they simply did not allow him to leave. Imagine the legendary Ozzy Osbourne was fired from Black Sabbath. It happened because he overslept at his own concert. The day before, he was under substances, fell asleep in someone else's room, and slept for 24 hours. They searched the entire hotel and warehouse but could not find him. In the morning, Ozzy woke up, called Bill Ward, and he told him that he had been fired. Frankly, Ozzy got kicked in the ass and had to settle. He was soon replaced by a vocalist named Ronnie James, who, of course, failed to become Osbourne. That is why Ozzy wanted the band to change its name to Black Sabbath 2, but he no longer had the right to vote. The dismissal affected Osbourne quite strongly, but he was not going to beg anyone. For a while, Ozzy even thought about breaking out of music, getting a job in construction or at a slaughterhouse and starting a normal life. But for now, he stayed in Los Angeles because the manager continued to pay for his apartment. For months, Ozzy sat in front of the TV, not going outside, and his only visitor was a substance supplier. He said because he had been eating pizza and drinking beer all day, he looked like Jabba the Hutt. The relationship with his wife worsened every day. They called each other, but obviously they were moving away from each other. Ozzy spent most of the year on tour, returning home for a month, but during this time he mostly hung out in the studio or in bars. This continued for almost 10 years. His bandmates' marriages had long since fallen apart, but Ozzy was still hanging on. But Don Arden and his daughter Sharon wouldn't let Ozzy just disappear into the hallucinogenic fog. They constantly supported him, paid for his accommodation and hobbies, and also offered him new projects. For example, Don suggested that Ozzy lead a new band called Son of Sabbath, but this idea did not inspire him too much, though the idea of a solo project seemed good. Sharon was determined and became his personal manager, and even helped put together a new band which was to be called Blizzard of Oz. So a young but very talented guitarist named Randy Rhoads appeared next to Ozzy. As soon as he demonstrated his capabilities to Osbourne, he was immediately accepted into the team.
Wow.
Ozzy took the new guitarist to England and settled in his house, where they quickly wrote the first song, Goodbye to Romance. The process went quickly, and Ozzy wrote more and more of his own songs and turned into a real author. While Ozzy and Randy were practicing playing together, they found a bassist named Bob Daisley. They were only missing a drummer, but after the auditions, drummer Lee Kerslake soon joined the band. While recording the record, Ozzy thought a lot about Black Sabbath. He did not wish them harm, but he was still worried that his music would be much less popular. All doubts and worries died away as soon as Ozzy heard his song Crazy Train on the radio. Immediately after the premiere in England in September 1980, the record went up to the 7th place in the album chart. Appearing for 6 months in America, it sold 4 million copies and reached the 21st place there, which allowed Blizzard of Oz to be among the 100 best-selling albums of the 80s according to Billboard. Ozzy didn't read the reviews, but they were mostly favorable. A few days before the start of the tour, something else happened. Ozzy managed to reach Sharon's heart, and they suddenly found themselves in the same bathroom. I fell head over heels in love with her. The thing is, before I met Sharon, I hadn't met girls who looked like me. I mean, when we were out in public together, everyone thought we were brother and sister. We looked so alike, and it didn't matter where we went. No one drank more than us. No one made more noise than us.
He was so funny and quick-witted, and yet very vulnerable. And I just thought he was the funniest, sweetest guy I'd ever met, because he was so vulnerable about everything. And that just attracted me to him.
Sharon was not only his mistress, she proved to be an effective manager who independently took care of his affairs. The result of her work was that all the radio stations played Osbourne's solo songs. Everyone wanted to work with him, and also wanted to see him in concert in any city in the world. According to Ozzy himself, he would never have been able to achieve success if it weren't for her. But he did not leave Thelma either and was torn between the two women and caused suffering to both. He didn't want a divorce because of the children, but realized that in this way he was making them even worse. Before going on tour in support of his album, Ozzy told his wife everything. Even before the tour started, there were problems with the drummer and bass player. They did not want to perform under the name of Ozzy Osbourne, but insisted that the project should have another, more neutral name. This annoyed Ozzy because he had already gone through history where all members had equal rights. This time, everything was supposed to be different. That is, according to his rules. The Rebels were quickly fired, replaced by drummer Tommy Aldridge and bassist Rudy Sarzo. By the end of the tour, Ozzy Osbourne's first album with new musicians sold 1 million copies. According to Ozzy, much of the success depended on the work of Randy Rhoads. He was truly obsessed and never stopped learning. As soon as they were in a new city, Randy looked for a classical guitar teacher and took lessons from him. He knew musical notation, wrote songs, could teach himself how to play the guitar, but still continued to study. On the Blizzard of Oz album, there is a song called D that Randy wrote and dedicated to his mom. Also, we cannot forget about Sharon and her contribution to the fact that the album was released and Ozzy did not die of an overdose. Although the woman was no saint either and drank no less, it was she who kept the situation under control. They continued to be lovers, but Ozzy also hoped to improve his relationship with his wife. After returning to England, where Ozzy tried to reconcile with Thelma, things only got worse, and she asked for a divorce. Ozzy could not believe it for a long time, but when all his things were brought to him, he had to accept and send an envelope with alimony every week. Such a relationship suited everyone. And although Ozzy went on tour in a bad mood, what happened at the concerts quickly brought him back to his senses. It was on this tour that Osbourne began to arrange his famous shows. For example, during the performance of the song Goodbye to Romance, Ozzy shouted, "Hang the scumbag," and the hired little person flew up with a whip around his neck. In general, such madness was repeated at every concert. In those days, Ozzy walked around the stage in medieval armor, set fires in front of the audience, set off fireworks, and threw meat leftovers at the audience. The latter became his feature, but it was quickly intercepted by the fans. If Ozzy threw cow intestines at them, then the audience threw meat, heads, then dead cats, lizards, and birds at him. At the concerts, the atmosphere was getting more and more crazy. People started throwing objects with nails and blades. We had rubber snakes and plastic spiders flying around, and once a real snake flew onto the stage. It was very angry because it had to share the stage with Ozzy Osbourne. In 1982, there was a famous story which Ozzy still remembers today. They performed in the city of Des Moines and had already managed to hang up a little person when something was thrown on the stage. It used to happen that rubber toys were thrown on stage and then Ozzy would bite their heads off, demonstrating his insanity. This time he did the same, but it turned out it was not a toy, but a real bat.
By his infamy.
I looked, evidently threw an unconscious bat on the stage, and he thought it was a rubber bat, whatever, and he picked it up and bit the head off. And Sharon's going, "Dummy, it's real." I'm like, what?
Suspected of rabies, Ozzy ended up in the hospital and until the end of the tour, took shots to avoid getting sick. The next morning, he was being talked about in every newscast on the planet. Everyone thought he bit the bat on purpose, and several promoters even canceled his concerts. But this only encouraged the fans, and they started bringing even crazier things to the concerts. After the performance, the entire floor was littered with pieces of meat and dead animals. How about you? Maybe you saw some madness at the concert of your favorite artist. Write your story in the comments. Maybe it will beat the bitten-off head of a bat. Most of the crew were worried that Ozzy might not survive this crazy tour. As we can see now, they were wrong, but there were enough reasons to worry. Alcoholism did not go anywhere. When he was alone in the room, Sharon would take all his clothes off him so that he wouldn't think of going anywhere if he got drunk. It mostly worked, but Osbourne still had the audacity to go down to the bar naked. Sharon once did the same, but made the mistake of leaving her dress in the room. So Ozzy went out into the street of the Texas town, and after 5 minutes, he was lying on the ground in handcuffs. It was not only his outfit, but also the fact that he could not find a toilet and urinated on a memorial in memory of those who died in the American-Mexican War. This prank cost him several hours in jail and $10,000. Then, tragedy struck. During the tour, when the money was pouring in and the fans were throwing meat at the musicians as a sign of respect, Randy Rhoads said he wanted to leave. He did not look like a rock musician of those times. He did not drink or use drugs, but he was obsessed with the guitar and cigarettes. More than anything, the musician wanted to finish university, which he told Ozzy as they traveled from one city to another in their tour bus. Ozzy fell asleep and woke up a few hours later to a loud explosion. The smell of gasoline was in the air, and everyone thought that the bus driver had lost control and crashed into a tree. Everything turned out to be even scarier, and Ozzy learned the whole truth from the investigation materials. While everyone was sleeping, the bus driver stopped to repair the air conditioner at the bus stop. There was also a civilian airfield nearby. The bus driver was a former pilot who was fired after a crash when his helicopter crashed in the United Arab Emirates. That night, the driver decided to remember the past, took his friend's plane without permission, and decided to give everyone a ride. The pilot, his wife Rachel, and Randy came on board. The plane took off fine, but in the air, the pilot started doing crazy stunts and flew over the bus several times, almost hitting it with his wings, and then actually hitting it. The wing tore off a piece of the roof a few centimeters from where Ozzy was sleeping, flew several hundred meters, and crashed. The bodies were identified by teeth marks. Randy Rhoads was 25 years old.
Dived into the home.
The home then burst into flames, and killed were the band's lead guitarist, hairdresser, and bus driver.
The best decision after the funerals of friend and colleague Randy Rhoads was to continue the tour. Everyone was in a state of shock and apathy, but they had to go on. Sharon insisted. Sometime around that time, Ozzy proposed to her, and Sharon sent him to hell, and then accepted. Over the course of several months, she changed her mind. In total, Ozzy proposed 17 times. The wedding took place in Hawaii when the band went to Japan with concerts. The ceremony was modest. Sharon's parents, Osbourne's mother, and his sisters were present. Ozzy does not remember most of the wedding, and on the first night of the wedding, he did not spend the night in the room for the newlyweds, but in the corridor where he fell asleep. Once Sharon became his wife, she arranged for Ozzy to get the rights to his old songs. She made a deal with the previous label, went into debt, but still paid and returned Ozzy his songs. Sharon was not only involved in his affairs, she also tried to fight Ozzy Osbourne's flaws. First, she declared a war on the powder and forced him, if not to quit, then to significantly reduce the amount he sniffed. When Sharon found out she was pregnant, she also started fighting Ozzy's alcoholism. In all seriousness, she assured him that if she saw the powder, she would call the police and Ozzy would go to jail. It was obvious to him that she was not joking. The singer continued to drink, but secretly. He ran to a nearby bar, drank 6 glasses of beer, and returned 5 minutes later as if nothing had happened. He also bought an 18-liter bottle of vodka and hid it in the oven, which seemed like a good plan because Sharon didn't like to cook. But one day, she got the urge to bake something, and Ozzy was left without his inspiration for new songs. It's hard to even imagine how much effort it took Sharon not to screw everything up and leave the perpetually drunk, generally inadequate, and half-crazy Ozzy, but she managed to do it. On September 2nd, 1983, their first child, a girl named Amy, was born. A few months after her birth, Osbourne was supposed to go on tour, but Sharon didn't want to sit at home either. Because of this, a baby bed was installed in the back of their bus, and little Amy also took part in Ozzy Osbourne's tour. The fact that there was a child with them did not change Ozzy's behavior in any way. He also got drunk, woke up somewhere in the middle of the freeway, and ended up behind bars. As soon as he received freedom, he once again drank himself to an inadequate state. This did not improve relations with his new wife, and their quarrels reached a new level. Ozzy constantly put himself in danger when he was drunk. He had strange tattoos, which annoyed Sharon immensely. His antics on stage did not inspire her either. One day, Ozzy put on a wig under which he hid balls of red paint. During a concert, he began to tear his hair and artificial blood flooded his face. Sharon almost passed out. But no matter how much they quarreled and no matter what Ozzy did, it could not destroy their relationship. A few months after the end of the crazy tour, Sharon found out that she was pregnant again. On October 28, 1984, another girl was born to the Osbournes who was named Kelly. A week after her birth, Ozzy went to a rehabilitation center, although he thought he was going on vacation to some expensive sanatorium. The first thing he did was ask where they had a bar, and he was stunned by the answer that there was no bar and that he was here to stop drinking. The psychiatrist also said that I have a tendency to become addicted, so no matter what I do, everything becomes a habit. And to top it all off, I had OCD, which made any situation seem 10 times worse in my eyes than it actually was. I was a walking encyclopedia of psychiatric disorders. But therapy did not help. A few hours after leaving the clinic, Ozzy got drunk again. The occasion was the Rock in Rio festival, where Osbourne performed on the same stage as Black Sabbath.
Let's go crazy!
In 1985, the third child was born, a boy named Jack. At this point, Sharon and Ozzy decided it was time to call it quits, and Osbourne had a vasectomy to avoid having any more children. When they changed their mind a few months later, it turned out to be irreversible. We will see what kind of father he is later when we get to the reality of the show with the participation of the Osbourne family. But if we talk about Ozzy as a father, he now regrets the way he behaved. most of Ozzy's time was spent at concerts or intoxicated, which did not contribute much to his parental authority. In the future, his son Jack will make a documentary about his father while he'll try to understand why Ozzy was not the best role model. He was very unsure of himself when he was younger, but was suddenly thrust into the limelight. An incredibly successful musician who developed a fantastically entertaining way of being self-destructive to mask his insecurity. After the birth of the third child, it became obvious that Ozzy's health problems were only getting worse. Doctors in Los Angeles were convinced he had Parkinson's disease or multiple sclerosis because so many symptoms pointed to it. And although neither the first nor the second were confirmed, the doctors recommended him one thing: to become a normal person and stop self-destruction. It was because of this that Ozzy decided to end his career in 1992. After the last tour, which was called No More Tours, Ozzy tried to live a normal life and almost died of boredom. He often remembered his father, who had retired and was hospitalized immediately after working in the garden. Osbourne lasted only a few years. In 1996, the singer almost begged Sharon to organize a few more performances for him. According to Sharon, the best advertisement would be to attend the performances of the band Black Sabbath. At that time, without Ozzy, they noticeably declined in popularity. The last albums did not even enter the charts, and Ozzy did not speak to Tony Iommi for several years. This is how the reunion of Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne took place. Joint performances rekindled an old flame, and Black Sabbath began to regroup to record a new album. But old problems quickly resurfaced, and drummer Bill Ward suffered a heart attack and couldn't play at his old pace. The press grumbled that the new record didn't work out because of my selfishness, but on the face of it, I doubt that was the problem. I just changed. We all changed. So the album never came out. Despite the fact that most of Ozzy Osbourne's life has been on the stage, there are many people who know him primarily because of the reality show about his family's life. In fact, Ozzy doesn't even remember if he agreed to be filmed, but one day he woke up to find that he was filming a show about his family. The kids didn't mind, Sharon didn't either, and Ozzy didn't have much of a choice. The garage was turned into an MTV office, and cameras followed the Osbourne family around the clock. Had he known it would take several years, he would have never agreed, but at the time, Ozzy thought the show wouldn't even get on the air. The Osbournes hit television on March 5, 2002, and made his family almost as popular as The Simpsons.
Hi. Stop it, Ozzy. You know, I think I'm going to put this plastic bag on my head. Go on.
Ozzy became famous instantly, but not as a musician, but as a man swearing on camera. Some began to write that Osbourne had sold out, but it was unlikely that he was worried. The fact is that no rock star before him had done something like this. Moreover, the show was an experiment, and no one knew whether or not it would become popular. And it happened, and their family was even invited to dinner with the President of the United States. Of course, Ozzy got drunk at the same table as George W. Bush and his wife.
What a fantastic audience we had tonight. Washington power brokers, celebrities, Hollywood stars, Ozzy Osbourne.
A month later, Ozzy met the Queen of Great Britain. That is, the guy who started out by robbing houses and cleaning cow stomachs was now sitting at the same table with the Queen. It's not bad, don't you think? When the ratings of their show broke all possible records for popularity, MTV offered the Osbournes a long-term contract. At first, Ozzy tried to refuse, but a check for $250,000 quickly put him off, and it was not a salary, but just a gift from the TV channel.
Sorry, you're not watching a movie that's about marijuana smoking. Turn it off. I'm serious. I'm serious. You're not watching films about marijuana use.
Shut up. Go leave my room now. I don't need your help.
Without alcohol, Ozzy lasted quite a decent amount of time, although he sometimes broke down on beer. When filming began, he was under such stress that he was taking 40 different pills a day. All of them were prescribed by a doctor, but apparently it was not recommended to take them at the same time. It was bad for health, but good for ratings.
The nitrous going.
Okay, guys.
Ozzy, I know it's working because I'm even feeling it, man.
You want to sit up? You want to rinse out? You want to rinse out?
No.
No? Why don't you take a rinse? I think it'll feel better.
At one point, Ozzy started to think he was dying, so he started seeing doctors. One day, he underwent a very unpleasant procedure called a colonoscopy. Nothing was found, but Ozzy got it into his head that if he had to go through this, then his wife had to as well. If he hadn't forced her to do it, the doctors wouldn't have detected her cancer at an early stage. The operation was also filmed by cameras from MTV. After a successful operation, months of chemotherapy began to defeat the disease. Ozzy was freaking out, but Sharon insisted that he not dwell on her recovery and continue to perform. As always, Ozzy obeyed his wife. Fortunately, Sharon made a full recovery and was discharged from the hospital within weeks, all because Ozzy forced her to undergo a colonoscopy. As for Ozzy himself, his tests showed that he was completely healthy, but he was getting worse and worse. In 2003, he couldn't even hold anything in his hands. They were shaking so much. Added to this was a constant stuttering that made it difficult to speak, but most importantly, to sing songs. In the end, he managed to find a doctor who did several hundred more tests and still found that there was something wrong with Ozzy Osbourne. It turned out that he, like his father, had the same abnormality associated with certain chromosomes. The disease did not have a separate name, but it was non-fatal for someone who does not use alcohol or addictive substances. The doctor said bluntly, "If Ozzy quits, everything will be fine. If not, everything will end very quickly and tragically." He got better after the first dose of medication. The stuttering disappeared and the hand stopped shaking. In honor of this event, the next day, Ozzy and his daughter Kelly went to the studio and recorded the song Changes with her.
I'm feeling happy. I am so sad.
During that period, Ozzy did not drink, but he continued to mix different pills. Sure, it was better than the mountains of powder he'd snipped a few years ago, but it still wasn't recovery from addiction. During his long and eventful life, Ozzy was hospitalized several times and was on the verge of death more than once. This time, already in the new millennium, he almost died after crashing his motorcycle. He spent 2 days in a coma, and when he woke up, he blamed the fascists for everything. Before moving on to this story, we'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel, like and ring the notification bell. We try to make videos informative and interesting, so it's great to see feedback. Thank you, and let's continue. The day before, Ozzy was riding his bike in a field. Then he got on the highway, sped up, and at full speed drove his wheel into a hole in the road. The bike was thrown into the air, Ozzy fell into the grass, and this heavy machine landed on top of him. The hole he jumped into had been there since World War II, when the Germans bombed England. So, to some extent, the fascists really were to blame, but probably mostly pills. Ozzy's neck was damaged and 8 ribs were broken, which punctured his lungs, causing them to fill with blood. The broken collarbone tore an artery in his arm, so it was originally going to be removed. So that Ozzy would not go crazy from the pain, the grieving racer was put into a medically induced coma where he spent almost a week. The first thing he knew when he woke up was that him and his daughter's song Changes had hit the top of the charts. For a long time after the injury, Ozzy could not walk and moved around in a wheelchair. His memory had deteriorated, and there were about 100 bolts in his chest, but still, he was alive and really appreciated this fact. Perhaps this is why Osbourne did not agree to continue the reality show. For 3 years, the whole world watched his life. It was necessary to make a connection with it, especially since the channel, in an attempt to make as much money as possible, killed this show and turned it into a bubblegum. Another problem was that in 3 years, everything that could be filmed was filmed. When it came time for the last season, we had to come up with something new. We became so popular that crowds surrounded us every time we left the house. All this seemed a bit contrived, which directly contradicted the very idea of the Osbourne family. In 2005, the show was finally taken off the air. Around that time, an unknown person broke into the Osbourne home. The criminal was of his height and build, and Ozzy met him at night when he was going to the bathroom. Noticing the owner of the house, the man rushed to escape through the window, but Ozzy grabbed him by the throat and did not let go. Not knowing what to do with him, Ozzy pushed him from the 3rd floor, and the man flew down, breaking tree branches. The criminal managed to escape. The police did not catch him, and in total, he stole about £2 million worth of jewelry. Everything was insured, but Ozzy still bought a few pistols and a shotgun afterward to be ready next time. Today, the legendary Ozzy Osbourne is 75 years old. His disease, which turned out to be a subtype of Parkinson's, is progressing. Despite the treatment and the fact that he hasn't used anything for a long time, the past echoes with illnesses. In 2020, Ozzy underwent surgery to remove the metal rods that were put in after the accident. During this, a malignant tumor was found in him. If he manages to cope with it, it is more difficult to fight with Parkinson's. In 2023, Osbourne announced that he would stop performing, but after a few months he changed his mind and made several performances again. His band Black Sabbath has reunited several times, the last time in 2017 during the farewell tour The End. Despite this, former members keep in touch. Tommy Iommi often appears on Ozzy's solo songs, and it is possible that fans will still be able to hear new music from Black Sabbath. During his creative career, Ozzy Osbourne, together with Black Sabbath, recorded 10 albums and released another 13 records solo. The stereotypical image of a rabid rock star is in many ways copied from our today's hero, and he is both a role model and one whose example serves as a warning to young musicians. Ozzy himself does not lose optimism and is sure that he'll live for at least another 10 years. Of course, he's much calmer now. He no longer eats bats on stage, throws meat at fans, and does not drink alcohol. But he's still Ozzy Osbourne, one of the greatest rock musicians ever. Thank you for watching the video to the very end and listening to our story about the founder of the legendary band Black Sabbath and just a unique person. We hope this story was not only funny, but also instructive. The fact that he managed to get out of the fog is a real miracle. It's better not to go there, but just make music and enjoy it. If you're interested in our other stories of outstanding musicians, we've already had many of them on our channel. To watch one of them, click on the video that appeared on your screen. Thank you for liking and subscribing, and see you soon.